Looking at great temptation throughout the scriptures, we come to the story of King David and his temptation after seeing the beautiful Bathsheba. Good morning, I'm Pastor Ernie Lewis of the Blue Point Church in Sisney, Illinois, with your thoughts for Thursday. You know, when we read about David, we find that God has brought him from that sheepfold to the battlefield and enabled him to slay the giant Goliath. Then God chose him and raised him up to be the anointed king over all of Israel. And finally, God describes him as a man after God's own heart. A beautiful picture of this man that God has chosen as king. But then we come to 2 Samuel chapter 11, where it was the spring of the year, and the Bible says it was the time when kings went forth to battle, but David remained in the palace that year. He sent his troops out to fight for him. Then it happened one evening that David arose from his bed and walked on the roof of the king's house, and from the roof he saw a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful to behold. So David sent and inquired about her, and someone said, "She is Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah the Hittite." Now, there are so many temptations and failures in this story about King David. I want us to notice a few of them. First of all, he wasn't where he was supposed to be. He should have been at war with his army, but he was acting sort of lazy this spring. He stayed at home. Laziness and having too much time on our hands will lead to temptation and a snare. You know, the old saying, idle hands are the devil's workshop, is so much truer than we really realize. It's a very true saying that should scare us to death, to tell you the truth. And secondly, he lingered in looking at a woman bathing. I think he should have turned away immediately. Perhaps he should have run back into his house, but he didn't. He stayed to watch for a while and think about this woman. Now, when we linger at a temptation, it's like a fish nibbling at bait. You can see that cork begin to go up and down, and you know that sooner or later, somebody's going to get caught here. And it's going to be disastrous. I don't know about you, but I don't think I would like being filleted. But sometimes we get into those places where we know we'll get caught. And thirdly, when they told him that she was married, it should have stopped his inquiries right then. He should have halted any interest in this woman. But he didn't stop. He continued to seek more about her. Perhaps one of the temptations of life is thinking that we deserve everything that we see and perhaps even doing whatever it takes to acquire that thing. David called for his servants to bring her to the palace. He even lay with her there, knowing that she was a married woman, but David didn't really care because he was the all-powerful king. And then, of course, David even plotted to have her husband killed. I'm sure that there was a time when David would never have considered murder like this, well, except that he got too deep into temptation and sin. And when we surrender to temptation and sin, we acquire a really bad attitude. You know, whenever Nathan confronted David about his sin, through this parable that he told about a man stealing from his neighbor, David became so angry until Nathan told him, "David, you're the man that I'm talking about here, okay? You are the man in the story." Giving way to temptation causes us to be blinded to even our own sins, for that matter. So David's story of temptation and lust and sin is a terrible story. It's about failure of a man once described as a man after God's own heart. But it is a wonderful reminder that none of us is above lust and greed and falling prey to temptation that drives us away from God.